Richard Stengel is a former Time magazine managing editor. He wrote the biography Mandela's Way, and he collaborated with Mandela on his own autobiography. Stengel also wrote Mandela's obituary for a commemorative edition of Time magazine on newsstands now. Welcome.
Thanks, Charlie.
We're watching this, and we're wondering how much Nelson Mandela might have thought about this day and planned for it.
You know, Charlie, I did ask him about not only his legacy, but what he thought was going to happen to him when he died. And he wasn't a religious man. I mean, I think he was a spiritual man. He would always say, I will, something formulaic, I will dwell among my ancestors, I will walk the hills I walked as a boy. I think he just didn't like talking about it. And he would always say, look, I'm not a legend, I'm not an icon, I'm not a saint, I'm a regular flesh and blood guy. And I don't know that he thought about it that much. The South African government has obviously thought about it a great deal. And, you know, I don't think I'm being sacrilegious to say that, you know, Nelson Mandela is now South Africa's greatest export. The government recognizes that. They want people to congregate. They want that to be part of brand South Africa, and it is.
You know, everyone is very sentimental about him, but those close to him, as you point out, say that he was not a sentimental guy. But you can't help but think that this is exactly what he wanted for the world. You have world leaders coming together who are at odds. You have people in the stands who years ago couldn't even sit next to each other. He has to be looking at us and saying, well done. Don't you think, Rick?
Well, it's, as you say, Gail, I mean, he's reconciling people in death, just as he did in life, and bringing people together. And of course, everybody wants to borrow a little bit from the halo of Nelson Mandela. What world leader wouldn't want to be at Nelson Mandela's memorial service?
How do you think he'd want to be remembered in history? In South African
history?
I
think as a unifier, I mean, he is the father. As Jacob Zuma said, he's South Africa's greatest son, but he is our father, and he is the father of modern South Africa. He was such a great patriot. I just think that he really sees as his legacy. He doesn't necessarily think about anything larger than that, even though his legacy is larger than that. But I think he saved his country and brought democracy to his country.
Rick, it was so interesting to hear President Obama eulogize Nelson Mandela. This crowd in that stadium went wild for Obama. And Obama, in some ways, tying his own inspiration for politics, his own journey to his own improbable journey, as he calls it, to that of Nelson Mandela, and comparing Nelson Mandela to Gandhi and Dr. King and Abraham Lincoln. This was a remarkable address.
I think it was very personal for the president, and I think he was obviously inspired. His first political awakening came in the anti-apartheid movement. Something he said just really struck me and had resonance with me. It's that lovely line that nothing was inevitable about Nelson Mandela's life. And I think in some sense he's thinking about himself too. Nothing was inevitable in Barack Obama's life. And I think he sees this strange arc that they both have been on and kind of weaving together. And also there are very few people who ever in a position of power were able to speak about Nelson's legacy in real time.
And on that point of legacy, the president then used that in his speech to say, we must all then ask, how well have I applied his lessons in my own life? That matter of reflection about Mandela's life to our own differences and circumstances.
Yes, I mean, he's talking about the inner Mandela in all of us. I mean, if you can somehow imbue yourself with these values, I mean, it will make us a better person. But he also was very smart, I think, to notice that, look, there's still political prisoners in the world now. This, you know, Mandela's long walk is not over yet.
Exactly.
Yes.
The struggle continues.
Yes.
The struggle continues, that's right.
What do you see, Rick, as the future of South Africa? Because we all know that Nelson Mandela hasn't been in public view for years, but he was still the moral compass, the moral center of that country, and everybody was very mindful of that. And I've heard people express concerns, what will happen to us now? What do you think?
You know, I think there is a lot of concern and worry in South Africa, and some of it I think is exaggerated. I mean, what Mandela wants is to everybody to be imbued with his spirit, and I think he would feel best if he laid a foundation that everybody builds off now, that he has created this non-racial democracy, and that they should build on it. And I think that is true. Even, you know, if his successor has not had the same bar of achievement as Nelson Mandela, well, who really would?
You know, as we watch the end of a life and the celebration of a life, I'm always struck by, it is two things that happen to create a giant like Nelson Mandela. It is history and a moment in history and something that resides in a person. And when they're joined, then you have
Yes, Charlie, I think I've even told you this story before. Walter Sisulu, who was Mandela's great mentor and really sort of was his patron when he first came to Johannesburg, he was a real estate broker in Soweto. And he said he was in the ANC and he wanted the ANC to become a national mass movement. And then he said to me, and one day the door opened and a mass leader walked into my office. There was Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is so true. It's interesting. People in South Africa were telling me that, on this day that he was even strategic in his death, because his final service is on Sunday. Oprah and I are going to go on Sunday to Kunu. And the next day is a day of reconciliation. So they pointed out to me that even in his death, he was strategic in giving people time. I just thought that was an extraordinary observation.
It is lovely.
Yeah.
It's great to have you with us, Rick.
Thank you.
Great to
so
be
much
here.
coming.
Good to see you.
Our coverage of Nelson Mandela's memorial will continue throughout the morning. We are also streaming the service live in its entirety. You can watch the full ceremony at cbsnews.com.